decided to do something different today. We actually start the show with the end music. So we'll get to it in the second half hour. This is Stephen K. Bannon. You're in War Room Pandemic. You've got to laugh because otherwise you would cry. It's episode 8, and we're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Salem broadcast throughout the country, America's Voice.news, and the Newsmax TV in 70 million homes. We actually have an amazing open that we'll get to on the second half hour, at the bottom of the half hour. Okay, we've got Jason Miller, President Trump's senior communications strategist in 2016, Jack Maxey, who runs the engine room of the War Room Pandemic, Dr. Stephen Hatfield, one of the great experts in the nation, the author of the book 3 Seconds Until Midnight, also one of the top researchers, bio researchers in the country, on the adjunct professor over at George Washington University. We'll get to all that. We're going to have on today's show General Robert Spalding, one of the top experts from the National Security Council. He's a top expert on all things China. He's got an amazing book out about China. He's going to join us. We've got Maura Monahan in the second hour, Curtis Ellis to talk about the economic impact, a whole host of experts. We're getting everything. Before we bring in General Spalding, Jason, and thank you for staying over for a few minutes from the other show. The reason I want to have you in there, we had an inflection point yesterday. The inflection point is now, as you described it, President Trump is now a wartime president. This is about the wars of the 21st century, right? There's a virus out there. We don't know much about it yet. We're trying to find it out. Dr. Hatfield is going to explain more of this later, more of the science of it. But yesterday, the United States government stepped up. President Trump took some dramatic action, and we had a press conference, and in that press conference laid out some very specific things and, quite frankly, some big details. The press, who has been beating up President Trump relentlessly, right, all week, has been pressing President Trump all week, actually gave the pretty good reviews. Walk through what happened yesterday and how was it received?
Absolutely. And as you guys have been covering, the reason why we're at this point, just yesterday they announced 45 new deaths because of the coronavirus, bringing the total to 259. Apple has shut all of their China stores, not the manufacturing facilities, but all the stores.
It's unclear about manufacturing. In
Right.
London, some of the smart money guys think they shut down, because the headline says Apple shuts down all operations. And so some people are saying that, what's happened with their Foxconn situation. They definitely have shut down all stores. They've shut down all offices. They've shut down all centers, etc.
And the South China Morning Post saying this morning that Wuhan may be home to 75,000 infected people. And to keep things in perspective, in Hubei province, where Wuhan is, a population the size of Italy is under quarantine. That's the global pandemic that we're dealing with here. So in the United States yesterday, we had Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar, had a press conference along with Stephen Biegun, who's the Deputy Secretary of State, a number of other folks, Ken Cuccinelli from Homeland Security, to announce effectively that if you are a foreign national and you've been to China recently, then you are not coming into the U.S. Just period, point blank, until further notice. Now, there are some exceptions if you're an immediate family member, where you can come through if you pass the health screening. But if you're a U.S. citizen and you've been to China in the last 14 days, then you're going to be quarantined for 14 days.
How big a deal is that, Dr. Hatfield, when the United States government quarantines citizens when it's coming in? That's only been done a few times in the country's history, correct? That's a big deal?
It's a big deal.
And look, this is... Steve, you correctly called this, that there are tough decisions that are going to have to be made. And you know how many complaints we're seeing in the newspapers today or around the country?
Zero. Folks are woke.
They are woke on this.
They're
and
woke.
in fact, there was even a moment here where, of course, in the woke media, there was a question in the press conference, are you worried that you guys are overreacting here? Because with all these, the 250 or so deaths globally, although that's just what is being reported, are you guys overreacting here? And they were very definitive in the response, saying, you know what, we'd rather overact a little bit here and shut this thing down than have it explode and not bring it to people's attention, not elevate it, and then look and say, what could we have done differently? So I think, again, this is another strong indication of leadership from the administration and showing that they're serious on this. But there's still some real concerns here. I mean, even though American and Delta and United have all shut down their flights, any flights that are coming into the U.S. are now routed to a couple of specific, I think it's several specific airports. So this is being very much more tightly controlled, but there's still not a complete lockdown for all global transit going to and from China, and that's still an issue that's out here.
Just before we let you go, I know you got other stuff to do, and you're going to be with us on our trip today. We're going to be on Maria Bartiromo tomorrow on Sunday Futures with Maria Bartiromo at 10 a.m. I think I'm on at 10:10, so I'll be down at in Miami. Jason will be going down with the team, and we'll be back doing the show on Monday, so we're not going to miss anything. On messaging, how many is this the type of thing as a strategic communications person and driving there? Would you like to see this every day now from the White House press room? Would you like to see updates? Would you like to see so the American people start to see some of these people every day and start to get, like on the impeachment, all of a sudden, Adam Schiff became a personality. Pat Cipollone became a personality. People know who Atticus Philbin is now, right? Because they see him over and over again. Would you like to see that with this team?
More information is always better, whether it's a daily or every other day or when there are big events. I think they do need to stay on top of this because, again, we need to show to the American people that there's confidence in this government, that President Trump and his team have a plan, that they're continuing to take the tough steps, and things move lightning quick with social media. Unless you're out there to either confront them or to set the record straight or to get on offense and say, hey, guys, here are all the precautions we need to take.
Right.
You have to do the following things. And that's the important thing, too. And I want to go back to something that I said this in just in the last hour, but Dr. Hatfield, you made a genius point yesterday on our show when you said that this is all about the grassroots. This is all about the local medical professionals, the local first responders, the emergency folks. Yesterday's press conference was a wake-up call to everyone in America who deals with this, that this is a real problem. And that alone is massive.
Yeah.
Okay, Jason, thank you very much. Jason Miller will be hooking up after the show to get to go to Point South, do some Fox, and then come back. Okay, now I want to bring on, we're going to have our update after we bring on General Robert Spalding. General Spalding, very special guy. We're the National Security Council, where he was for the first couple of years under President Trump. He was also military attaché in Beijing. I think he's one of the foremost experts on the Chinese Communist Party, particularly how the United States interacts with them. He's got a book out that's absolutely amazing. It's a must-read. Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. He's a very special individual. General Spalding, thank you. Now, I got to start off first because I panicked the other day when somebody reached out to me and said, General Spalding got back from Taiwan and he's very ill with the flu. Spalding never misses an evolution. He's always there, and he said, Spalding's laid up. He's been in bed for 3 days. He got the flu. I go, oh, my God, we can't lose Spalding. We're just starting this thing. So first off, please tell me you don't have the virus. Were you sick?
No coronavirus, although they did quarantine me for, just a few hours to make sure.
Wow. So listen, given your sense of things, you're one of the top experts in the country in how they roll. What do you think's actually going on over there, and the information we're getting out of the CCP? How do you assess it? Because you're one of the best guys at analyzing how this regime rolls.
Well, I think first of all, the beginning of this, all the way back to December, the local guys were trying to keep it contained because part of the problem with their system is good news doesn't go up, and so they were trying to contain it, and of course, what we have is a budding pandemic, and it can't be contained. So sometimes, and I think this is where the idea of a totalitarian regime being a threat to human civilization comes into play, because when it comes to pandemics, it's not a good idea to not let good news or bad news travel.
And so you thought what happened is that so you believe that the senior people in the CCP may not have really known about this, because I discount that. I think that even though bad news, you don't like to travel, and I realize this is kind of like Chernobyl. Your colleague Dr. Thea and Lian Chan Han wrote that great piece for the Hill newspaper about this is China's biological Chernobyl. Do you actually believe that the CCP at the highest levels may not have known about this for a while?
Yeah, I believe that. And it's just the way that system works. They don't, and it continuously happens where they try to keep it contained, and then once it can't be contained, what's happened is, of course, a lot of those local officials have been sacked as a result. But I mean, it's still the system is not good at passing up information, particularly that is counter to what the the leadership wants to hear.
Listen, the people talk about SARS. We'll get into this in the second half of this hour with Dr. Hatfield and Jack Maxey. People talk about SARS, but China is a very different country today, very different in its interactions and interlinking nodes with the world economy than it was in 2003. Today, you were a military attaché, American military attaché in Beijing. Can you describe to people how important, how big Wuhan is, how important that part of central China? What's the logistics? The just-in-time inventory chain for the world kind of emanates out of there.
Well, I think, most of that, is be down in Shenzhen and Guangzhou. Nevertheless, I think it is a major city. Of course, China is such a populous place. They have a lot of major cities. In fact, they just went live with 5G in 50 of their major cities. So, but a major city in China is several million people, and Wuhan is almost 20 million. So it is a major city by any definition. Of course, in China, there's so many major cities that sometimes it loses its relevance.
Do you believe that they can actually quarantine? They're talking about a section of the country that's. I was on the phone earlier with people in France today. They said it's larger than France and has more people than France or more people than Italy. Do you believe, given your understanding of the regime, can they actually do something that's never been done in human history and try to quarantine 75 or 80 million people?
Oh, they can. They absolutely can. I mean, when I'll just give you an example of when I was living in Shanghai. A friend of mine was building a factory for a Fortune 100 company, and a 25-ton piece of equipment shows up at the factory floor, and they need to move it into place. And he said, "Where's the forklift?" And they said, "What forklift?" And all of a sudden, hundreds of people just came out of the woodwork to pick this 25-ton piece of machinery up and move it into place. So they know how to move people and move them fast.
Boy, you gotta love. I love the Chinese people. In fact, the Chinese people here are the victim. People talk about xenophobia and the potential racism here. You got to remember, the Chinese people are the victims of this. They are the victims of this regime, and all our hearts go out to them. They're the finest. People like General Spaulding, myself, have had the honor and pleasure of living over there and interacting with the people. They're absolutely fantastic, and that's a typical story, right? They will come up if they got to move it, it'll get moved, right? It may not have a forklift, but it's going to get moved. Walk us through, in your knowledge. Look, you've been focused on 5G and the technology space. They just announced Apple's closed. We don't know if they've closed their operations, but they're closing their stores. From a technology, from an economic point of view, how integral China is to the entire supply chain of the world's advanced manufacturing. What do you think happens over the next days, weeks, and months?
Well, I think it depends on how long this pandemic lasts. But already you said I was in Taiwan about 3 weeks ago. Taiwan's moving all of their supply chains out of China. Supply chains are moving. Vietnam's filled up, but it had already begun to happen as a result, really, of the tariffs and of the position of the administration. I think this is just going to accelerate it. And who knows? I mean, this just may be really what causes a real slowdown in that economy, more so than just the trade war.
We've got to bounce here in a second, but I got to get your thoughts on one thing. Last night was Brexit. We had Nigel Farage on the show yesterday morning, and part of the thing he talked about, even with the great move in Brexit, was this really war among the elite about Huawei in 5G, and I know that's one of the things you've been working on. Understanding this pandemic now is going to encapsulate the world or engulf the world. The Chinese technology. Can you just talk about how important it is for the British government? It looks like they're going to acquiesce. And Farage went through all the leaders in the former British governments, Cameron, Blair, all these guys are on the board of Huawei, consultants of Huawei, making tens of millions of dollars a year off Huawei. How important is what's happening to our oldest ally, or our second oldest ally in back of France, with this Huawei situation?
Well, I think it was quite tragic that they made the decision, but, British Telecom is 100% Huawei, and so they were facing the fact that they've got to basically transform their telecommunications infrastructure and they just don't have the capacity to do that overnight. They made this decision 15 years ago, and they're really deeply embedded with Huawei. And so, as opposed to, say, Germany, I was in Berlin and Brussels almost 2 months ago now, and both of those were really solidly, and I know that that's not what the media is reporting, but they're really solidly behind getting away from Huawei. So I think, the UK, because of British Telecom, quite frankly, is at the mercy of British Telecom. And so, hopefully, as things progress, we'll be able to get them back on track. But, actually, I think of the EU countries, and of course former EU for UK, I think the UK was most in bed with Huawei because they've had it's all British Telecom.
Our last thing, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State Pompeo, has been over in Europe and in Ukraine, and I think he was in the United Kingdom. He said, I think it was yesterday, the greatest existential threat to the United States, to the West, and our greatest enemy is the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, which is a pretty, we have a whole of government approach now, but that's a pretty, pretty tough throwdown. How do you think the CCP weathers this pandemic? Is their whole legitimacy of their regime on the line here?
No, I don't think that's the case yet. But I do think that Xi Jinping is really in peril, because what's going to happen is you're going to see fracturing. I think you already have, especially when you saw the papers come out, in the New York Times about the Uyghurs. So you see these fissures happening when you see internal Chinese Communist Party documents being leaked. I don't think, and then of course with this pandemic, you see a lot of criticism of the administration, which is quite frankly since the 19th Party Congress, all Xi Jinping, and so I think it's going to be damaging to him. It will be the economy that is the unwinding of the Chinese Communist Party, but in the short term, I think it's Xi Jinping that's at risk.
How big, before I let you go, then how as central as the logistics chain is to their economy today, given that Hong Kong now has the universities closed to March 2nd, and that's like closing the churches in Hong Kong, right? You've got factories that are being told, extend Golden Week a couple of weeks. You've got, we're going to find out Apple and Foxconn, whatever, are these shutting down, which never happened at SARS. SARS was a 1 or 2% hit on their GDP back in 2003 when they were a $1.9 trillion economy. They never shut down a factory. Here, Golden Week's already being extended until whenever. People are supposed to be back to work Monday morning, and they're extending it at least a week, sometimes 2 weeks, and in some situations, hey, come back in March. Given your knowledge of their economy, how big a hit do you think they're going to take?
Well, I think the challenge here is can they keep the capital inflows going? Because, the fact that they're shutting everything down really means that they're getting less dollars coming in. Of course, they were relying on the MSCI target increase to 20% to have cash inflows, U.S. dollar inflows, which they need to continue to keep the economy going, buy energy, food, and raw materials. I think, though, with what's going to happen with this pandemic, I think you see a slowdown of the incoming capital, and then that's going to be, I think, the real challenge for them, because nobody wants to take RMB to buy energy or food or raw materials.
General Spalding, how do people keep up? Do you have a Twitter handle, a web page? How do people keep up with all your speeches, writings, et cetera? Because you're one of the top experts in the world on this.
Yeah, Twitter at Robert_Spalding, SPALDING, and I have a website, armchaireconomist.io.
Dr. Spalding, or Dr. General Spalding, because you're our doctor too. Dr. General, Dr. General, thank you very much for joining us today on War Room Pandemic.
Thank you.
General Spalding is going to have a lot more to do with us, where he's going to be a major part of the show as we go forward. The book is Stealth Wars: How China Took Over the World While America's Elite Slept. It's in the area of geopolitics, it's as powerful as Dr. Hatfield's 3 Seconds Until Midnight. So, Jack, before we go to break here, give me a minute of bad news. And walk through what's happened, like how many deaths, how many more reported overnight from where we were yesterday?
Well, we're at 11,943 ill, laboratory tested, 259 dead. To give you an example of the difference, Yesterday,
259 dead?
259 dead.
We were at 100.
Yesterday we were at
202.
213 and 9,911 last night when you had the
Right.
short episode. But I mean, I think that some of the things that we have to understand, China has now said that 21 provinces, people are not supposed to come back to work until February 10th. They've extended it
Golden week, a week.
That's 2% of the GDP right there, 1 week. And so the economic impact, I think, is going to be tremendous. Also, India, Modi just announced last night that they will not export any PPE. That's personal protection equipment. That's masks. That's protective gowns, etc. So this shows you that people are starting to realize that this supply chain issue with China is going to come back to bite us.
Cool. We're going to get all into this in the second part of this half hour. We've got Dr. Stephen Hatfield. We've got Jack Maxey here on War Room Pandemic. We're going to talk about the actual thing itself, the actual virus and the disease. Dr. Hatfield's done some work overnight. We're going to talk about that. This is, as we said Saturday a week ago, 1 week into doing the show, and we got a little, not blowback, but people said, why are you, it's not a pandemic, or why are you saying it's a pandemic? Why are you starting the show and calling it a pandemic? I said, no. In China, it's a pandemic, right? And I checked with Dr. Hatfield and other people before we named it. I said, no, it's a pandemic already. This is one of the biggest things in human history. I mean, never before has anybody tried to quarantine something of this scale and magnitude. We're going to return right here with Dr. Hatfield, Jack Maxey, Steve Bannon in just a moment.
Well, the virus has now killed more than 100 people in China, and new cases have been confirmed around the world.
So you don't want to frighten the American public,
France and South Korea have also got evacuation plans.
but you need to prepare for and assume
Strongly warning Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China.
that this is going to be a real serious problem.
France, Australia, Canada, the US, Singapore, Cambodia, Vietnam, the list goes on.
Health officials are investigating more than 100 possible cases in the U.S.
Germany, a man has contracted the virus.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
Japan, where a bus driver contracted the virus.
Coronavirus has killed more than 100 people there and infected more than 4,500.
We have to prepare for the worst, always, because if you don't and the worst happens,
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to War Room Pandemic. It's February 1st, year of our Lord 2020. We're in episode 8 in the War Room, 1 week of doing the show. And people ask me why we did it, why we started a week ago, because we know China and we have some sense, maybe not of viruses, but when things are big events, and this is going to be a big event in human history. This virus is a demon, and we cannot allow it to hide. That is from President Xi. He has now taken direct personal responsibility. He's now in charge of all things in China to do this. President Trump put forward his team yesterday and called forward a number of emergency measures, called it a health care emergency, as the World Health Organization has now done it. So this is a major thing. We're honored to have Dr. Stephen Hatfield in his book. First of all, he's one of the top experts in the country. But he's got a new book out, 3 Seconds Until Midnight. And if you want to learn about how this pandemic is going to roll out, I tell people you can either read The Stand by Stephen King, or you can read Hatfield's 3 Seconds to Midnight. Though both will not let you sleep at night. Dr. Hatfield was a biodefense researcher at the U.S. Army's Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. Those guys are the pros from Dover, the very best in the world that look at these viruses and how do you defend against biological weapons. He's now adjunct professor at George Washington University. You have one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show in the very first episodes, and now you've been able to come back from, you were up actually at Cambridge at a level 4 lab, which are the tops in the world. You're able to come down and join us here and be in the war room for the last couple of days, is the fact that you said, hey, we got to get the information out. Obviously, there's no need to scare people. We got to get information out, but this thing we hold. You've gone through a personal kind of metamorphosis over the last 24, 48 hours, where you're feeling much more, not negative, but you think it's actually maybe a bigger problem than people can handle as far as China goes. Yes. Can you walk through your thinking right now? Where do you think we stand? Because I keep saying the rest of the world's obviously a problem, but the rest of the world's starting to address it, closing borders, stopping air traffic, quarantine people. But in China, you have something of such a scale. And we now know it started probably the first week of December and really didn't get a grip on it until mid to late January. That in this game, you can't lose 7 or 8 weeks, particularly with population density. So take it from there and tell us where we are.
You can't really lose days. This concept of non-pharmaceutical interventions. This means when you don't have a vaccine, you don't have a drug, and you have an infectious disease, viral, bacterial, whatever it is. These are social distancing measures. They're individual, they're corporate, they're national. They're in layers. So individual, maintaining a distance away from others. If I'm talking to you and I'm closer than 3 feet, I'm creating a small amount of small particle aerosol, and I could transmit something to you. If it's a really nasty thing, you should be 6 feet away. Things that are contaminated by these aerosols. Well, you have to wash your hands before you touch your eyes, or your nose, or your mouth, mucous membranes. You touch your eyes with a contaminated hand with influenza, within a half hour, the virus will be in your nasopharynx, because that's where your tears drain. And then it gets into your lower airway. This virus likes the lower airway. The receptors we think it's using, the angiotensin converting enzyme, are deep in the lung. And when you look at these CAT scans from Wuhan, yeah, this is very, very, very serious in some patients. Now, the death rates are still manageable at the moment, but with this, if you plot out this increase in number of cases, it's going to fairly reach a point where, number one, you begin to affect the infrastructure of the city. If you're sending everybody home, who's going to pick up the trash? Where are you going to buy food? If you're quarantining these people, you got to get food in. Who's going to bring that in? Military? Your hospitals are going to start running out of things, and they already are running out of things. The Chinese had these pharmaceutical interventions get put in place to slow things down, so you've got time to make a response, and they missed it. So, yeah, I'm worried about China.
You're saying they missed it in the December-January timeframe.
The window.
Whether it's local officials or however it was, and blame can be allocated later, but just as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Now, what does that mean? What does that mean from where you think we are, and we keep every day, we get it up here, and we know the numbers of CCP giving us are not quite accurate, because you got people saying there's 45,000 people or 50,000 people that are affected. You've got them saying we have 100,000 people under observation, but they're putting a hard number out every day that's, it's 9,000 one day, 11,000. It's already blown through SARS. We're now up to almost 300 dead, right?
Yes.
But that number increases every day. But in the real math, when you talk about a population of, the part that's quarantined is the size of France and the population of France. And I talked to the French today and I said, hey, could you guys do this? And they said, absolutely impossible.
Yep.
Now, General Spaulding knows the PLA and the CCP, says, hey, they run in a different set of rules, so maybe. But where do you think we actually stand today with the scale of this?
Well, I think this is in China. This is going to run its course. It's going to keep sweeping through the population until a herd immunity is built up in the people that live there. And we hope the virus doesn't change. And I don't want to get alarmism here. But back to the seed in the soil.
Explain that to our audience. This may be a new audience today. Seed in the soil. When you talk to those concepts, what are they?
Let's take an infectious disease. Let's take Ebola. That's the seed. There's a socio-economic factor to all this, and that's the soil. if you're living under very high population densities and you're constantly exposed to high density populations all the time, taking mass transit into work, this type of thing. Well, it doesn't matter if a disease kills you in 3 or 4 days. There's plenty of other victims out there. So there's no constraints on the virus to become less lethal. There's plenty of targets out there. So you have a virus, it's replicating, it's making mistakes in its blueprints. Your body's fighting back. Things come into a balance. We call it serial passage. In the 1950s, these experiments were started. And you can take a virus that really, let's say Ebola, and it doesn't do anything to mice. Their fur doesn't even get ruffled. But if you inject it and wait about a couple of days and then take a blood sample and inject it into another mouse, then wait a couple of days, eventually it becomes adapted and you're going to have 100% lethality. Well, it can just as easily go the other way. Strain of hoof and mouth disease in pigs. Serial passage, serial passage, serial passage, until it's not causing any disease at all in the pigs. But if you take swabs from them, yeah, there's live virus in there and they're secreting it. So it's all random.
But it's so dense.
It's so dense
that there's a lot of there's a lot of randomness. They can have a lot of targets in the randomness.
Absolutely, sir. And when you have population numbers that high that are infected,
I want to talk about this population density because doctor. And by the way, you got to get the book 3 seconds until midnight. We're going to be getting a publishing deal so we can push this thing out more rapidly than having each one made by Amazon and shipped. And here's you talk about in this the 3 great plagues that have had a major impact on mankind. The plague of Justinian, which was in Constantinople and really brought about the destruction of the Roman Empire. And that came up from, they believe the scientists, from Ethiopia. You had the bubonic plague, and that came in the Great Silk Road from China through the Kazakhstans. You then had the Spanish influenza, although it's called the Spanish influenza. You think the science shows it started actually in Haskell, Kansas, came up to the troops and the thing, and then we took it to France, and it blew back in a horrible way.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's most chilling, in talking about this, you said something happened, and in the book you said something happened around 1990 that had not happened in human history. And you have a chart that lays out, and I know the camera can't get into it, so you got to get the book, but my point is that up until then, you would have viruses, you would have things going on, and they would run its course. But starting in 90, you started to have a concentration of these things. And your point is that's when also, because of the globalization of the manufacturing and manufacturing and modern economy, you had then these developing nations like China that all of a sudden rapidly urbanized. And you had this unbelievable urban density. And what people in the United States, I think, are just coming to the grips to, these are cities they've never heard of in their life, right? That Wuhan is bigger than New York City.
Yes.
Right? Bigger than New York City. And there's 20 other cities in the central region that are bigger than any city in the United States except for Chicago, LA, and maybe Houston. I mean, there's 20 of those, and you've never heard of these things.
These are mega cities. We have 2, technically.
New York
and LA.
LA. And they have mega cities. And that population density is that's the soil for when you have these seeds. And some of these seeds are animals, etc. One of the things people are not quite grasping, we're trying to connect dots, is that pork is an incredibly important part of the Chinese diet. China has bought Smithfield, hams over here, Smithfield, the great companies, a lot of those companies in pork. One of the reasons they had to get this deal done was these purchases that President Trump negotiated. But one of the reasons is half of the hog and pig population had to be killed because of a virus, this virulent
swine fever.
The swine fever that swept through and got half the population that was just stopped right before the beginning of coronavirus. Now, unrelated, but the concept is, once again, you've got these viruses that when they get there, they are exploding now on a scale that's unprecedented.
And I forget which year. It was about 5 years ago, I think. We had an avian influenza, Group A, sweep through the United States. And we had to kill to stop it millions of chickens and turkeys. The price of eggs went up.
Yeah.
And
Mike Braun talked about that. I think he's a poultry farmer. Talked about having to go in and kill the whole.
This was, I think it's 2015.
Yeah, he said he had to kill the whole,
And-
all of his inventory.
If you don't, the amount of virus that's out there is also trying to mutate and grow and find new hosts and become better adapted to man. So you have to kill these things. You take that host away before it can jump into man.
Well, look, we're finding out now that we don't. 97% of the vaccines are not made in the United States. You were very concerned that the Australians actually broke the first code of this virus and not the U.S., that the fact that it doesn't even seem like we're on top of as much as we have been in the past, actually maybe getting these viruses, et cetera. I want to go back, though, before we talk about the math, and so because I want to make sure people have their own intellectual mental map of construct. It was when they're hearing the news, what numbers they should think about and how they piece it together. You've used this phrase a couple of times. The virus just has to run its course. This thing just has to run its course. Put into layman's terms, when you say run its course, what does that mean? Because the Hong Kong analysis the other day from Hong Kong University
Yes.
they said, look, we know the government puts out 4,000 are affected. We think it's more like 44,000, and we'll use that as a base. And they ran their perturbations, right? And they came up with this will double every 6.2 days. Now, they did not put an end number on that, but they said this thing will just have to run its course because of everything that's happened and how late they got on top of it. But it'll run its course, and that course will be run. They will go through the yellow tape, right? They will go through the tape sometime around the 1st of May.
1st of May, yeah.
Now, Jack Maxey, in his former financial investment banker days, did some simple math. Like my dad said, this is the thing of compound interest. Put your pennies away and you'll be a rich guy eventually. Jack did some math and said, gosh, if I look at the Hong Kong guys who don't put a thing in, but if it runs its course the way their math set up every 6.2 days, I think I've got 1.2 billion people that are infected by May. So when you say run its course, can you frame that for us or contextualize that for us?
Until fear grips the population in an outbreak of this time. And you gotta, right now the death rates are, Ebola kills 70%. Ebola Zaire. It's the death rate.
MERS was 50%. SARS was 10%?
Yeah. And, these are, if we get around 20% mortality, there's nothing really you can do.
It's over.
It'll collapse everything.
And you're speaking, Doctor, you're speaking about in terms of the mechanisms of healthcare and supply and all that.
But you're at we're at 1% now.
Yeah,
The R-OT number, when you say run its course, I think you guys call it the R-OT.
I call it RO.
The RO number. That is, if Steve's infected, how many people does Steve infect along with him?
Right.
The danger range on that, if it's 1 to 1, it's fine because it'll burn
It's going to burn out.
It's going to burn out. The higher the number, obviously, the worse we have.
Exactly.
Okay. What was the SARS number? Because people keep saying, well, hey, SARS was bad, but it wasn't that bad. It's a different game. This is a different virus, but more importantly, the world's economy in China is different.
Let's take measles. That's about a 6 or a 7. It's incredibly infectious. And
That's why if kids get it in kindergarten, every kid gets it.
Every kid gets it. Okay. Ebola. 3.7. It's reasonable. Spanish flu around 3.2.
So the great pandemic 100 years ago was 3.2, 3 to 3.2.
In there.
That means every soldier that got it, 3.2 other people.
In that range.
And just let's take that for a second. When you've got that, how long is it? That burns out over time also, even when you get a 3 handle on it, a 3 number?
About 3 months.
Takes about 3 months.
It's very population mobility dependent.
Okay. What was SARS?
I don't recall.
Okay.
It's 2003.
Okay. You're giving me quotes from the Justinian 541, but that's okay.
Well, actually,
that's okay.
SARS started November 1, is what the date
Yep.
is, of 2002, ended really end of May, beginning of June of 2003.
And only had 7,800.
They have this concept of super spreaders,
Yes.
and we have it with the coronavirus.
A super spreader is like they've already got one. I think it was a patient, one of the patients in the hospital, 14 people, 14 doctors and nurses who treated this early patients were all infected.
Mm-hmm.
They think that's a super spreader, which is more than outside the curve of where the average is.
Yeah.
Well, SARS only got to 7,000. I mean, now we're at over 11,000 already, and that's a low count. Hong Kong's
admitting to.
Hong Kong's telling us it's 40 or 50. When you say run its course, that RO factor right now, and all very imperfect, well, because the numbers always shift. But right now, this looks like it's what, 2.5, 2.6?
I think that's probably reasonable.
Okay.
But if this thing picks up a greater contagiousness, the RO number will go up.
What do you mean greater contagiousness? You got to remember, when you talk about civilians, biology intimidated me so much, right? It was prep schools. I had my biology. I didn't even take it in college. I just said, hey, that's all the guys that are pre-med. God bless them, but that's not me.
If the RO figure goes up to 4,
that means Steve infects 4 other people.
Yeah, and they infect 4 other people. So you can see the math.
And when you say run its course, when you're at something like a 3 or 2.5, where we are now, and you got the population densities right now, you've got quarantine 80 million people in some central location the size of France.
Yeah.
Where does that lead you as a scientist?
If the neighbors are getting better and they're recovering, the majority of them, people handle it. When they died, they don't.
We haven't on the recovery. We originally in the first days of this, when we were here for the first broadcast Saturday a week ago, and even the build-up, when we started thinking about this and could we do a show and experts, there were I think there was 4,000 cases or 2,000.
No, much less.
Like
than that,
it was under 1,000. I think.
Right.
Under 1,000 we first started.
780 or
780. There were 49 what they considered recoveries, right?
No,
you haven't heard of the recoveries.
The 49 were the original cases that went to the hospital. Now, what's scary about this? We actually have surpassed the number of recoveries with the number of deaths today. So they're admitting that only 252 of the 11,000 plus tested have recovered. What do you think that does to the hospital
This is why we have
system?
Jack in the... What is that, as a scientist, what does that tell you?
I'm not happy.
What do you mean by that? Because you were concerned at first, but not you knew it was a pandemic there, but you've increasingly gotten more worried over the last couple of days.
This has the potential is there now for this thing to change, and we can see the social situation over there further spread until people become frightened enough that they do their own social distancing.
Okay,
because I'm not seeing it over there now.
You're not.
You've got workmen out there. Everyone's, they're running around in masks, but it's still high density.
The cities are in. Some of them look like ghost towns. Although I see the airports and things are going. Okay, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back actually with episode 9 just to make it easier on the podcast. We're going to return. We got Curtis Ellis, one of the top economists in the country, about the Trump program. Really understands China very well. He's going to talk to us about the economics. Of course, Mara Monahan, the daughter of Senator Daniel Patrick Monahan, and an expert in the nations around China. And she says it's starting to really increase. It is War Room Pandemic. Dr. Hatfield, Jack Maxey, Steve Bannon. We're going to return after a short commercial break.